So Oklahoma State Superintendent Ryan Walters has issued a statement mandating the presence of a Bible and the teaching of the Bible in every classroom in the state of Oklahoma. Now, I'm a Christian, but I actually oppose this, and I want to explain why, but let's watch his statement first.
We're going to make an important announcement today regarding the Bible and the Ten Commandments. My staff has been looking at Oklahoma statute. We've been looking at Oklahoma academic standards, and it's crystal clear to us that in the Oklahoma academic standards, under Title 70, multiple occasions, the Bible is a necessary historical document to teach our kids about the history of this country, to have a complete understanding of Western civilization, to have an understanding of the basis of our legal system, and is frankly, when we're talking about the Bible, one of the most foundational documents used for the Constitution and the birth of our country. We also find major points in history that refer to the Bible, that reference the Bible. We see multiple figures, whether we're talking about the Federalist Papers, constitutional conventional arguments, and Martin Luther King Jr., who use it as a tremendous impetus for the civil rights movement and tie many of those arguments back to the Bible. It is essential that our kids have an understanding of the Bible and its historical context. So we will be issuing a memo today that every school district will adhere to, which is that every teacher, every classroom in the state will have a Bible in the classroom and will be teaching from the Bible in the classroom to ensure that this historical understanding is there for every student in the state of Oklahoma in accordance with our academic standards and state law.
So in the earlier part of his statement, he's laying out the case for the historical significance of the Bible, citing all these different things, MLK, Federalist Papers, Constitution, different moments in history that draw from the Bible, that were influenced by the Bible. And in that sense, I think that it's fair game to expect that the Bible be taught in schools in the context of those things. Insofar as the Bible has had influence on history, yes, it deserves to be taught. But where I think he goes a step too far is in saying that we need to mandate teaching the Bible. I think that's a little bit strange given that we don't mandate the presence of the Declaration of Independence in every classroom, a copy of the Constitution in every classroom, letters from the Birmingham jail by Martin Luther King in every classroom. So all those documents that he cited as historically significant, which draw from the Bible, that's the basis for having the Bible in every classroom, yet we don't need to have those documents in the classroom. It's a little bit of a stretch there, and it sounds like we're just wanting to place the Bible because we have a belief in its significance. We have a belief in its value to students and want students to be influenced by the beliefs and the values that we have. And actually first got wind of this growing issue in our culture through my friend Colin Wright on X, who posted last week about an effort on the part of the state of Louisiana to mandate the display of the Ten Commandments in all public schools. And again, as a Christian, I'm not opposed to the Ten Commandments. I think they're enormously influential on our understanding of morality and on modern law. And yet the Constitution is enormously influential on our country, and that is not mandated to be displayed in every school. So why the special provision for this? It has to be because of the faith-based effort attached to it. To be clear, I don't have a problem if a school or classroom happens to have a Bible in the classroom because they're teaching something that has to do with the historical significance of Scripture. I don't mind if Scripture is read in classroom in that context. But that leads me back to the second part of the Oklahoma superintendent's statement that I found problematic, which was the specific language that teachers must teach from the Bible in the classroom. Now pay attention to that. Teaching from the Bible versus teaching about the Bible is a world of difference. If I'm teaching from the Bible, then I have leeway as a teacher to teach sermons, to teach religious practices, to teach my own theology and the historical narratives within the Bible as fact, even if there is no outside evidence beyond the Bible to support those claims. And if any parents have a problem with me doing that, I can fall back on the fact that this is a state-sanctioned thing. I am operating within the bounds of what I've been given by the state. Teach from the Bible. This is wrong, and it opens up the door to all kinds of other ideologies and religions to be taught in other places where a plurality of voters happen to support those things. So if you don't want pride flags being mandated to be displayed in your classroom, if you don't want your children to be mandated to read LGBTQ plus books, if you don't want them to be mandated to learn critical race theory as fact, then you can't support this. And again, I sympathize with his argument that the Bible is immensely influential influential on Western civilization in general and in America in particular. But you don't need a mandate to prop up that significance. If a teacher is tasked with teaching an honest telling of the history of Western civilization, that's going to include the influence of Christianity and the Bible. But again, that's not what this mandate encompasses. This mandate encompasses having a Bible in every classroom and making every teacher teach from the Bible. And I must emphasize, we are talking about public schools. In public schools, there can be no bias toward any ideology or religion. If you want a leg to stand on, if you are in opposition to things like critical race theory or gender ideology being taught as fact in schools, then you can't support Christianity or the Bible being taught as fact. You can't support Bible lessons being taught as fact in public schools. Having said that, in a public school setting, there have been and still are ways for students to engage with Christianity, with Bible teaching, if they want to, on a voluntary basis through extracurricular means. And I imagine at this point, there's probably some Christians watching thinking, Taylor, we have to fight fire with fire. These people are taking over our schools and our laws and our curriculum. And where we have the opportunity to, we have to institute laws and mandates to impose Christianity on society. And to be honest, I feel you. Look, cards on the table. I think it'd be good for kids to be exposed to the Bible as a Christian. I think it'd be good for kids to learn about the historical significance of the Bible and for that to be something that is emphasized to them. Heck, I think it'd be good for them to learn Bible lessons and biblical morality. I think that would be a healthy, good thing for American children. But as a citizen of this country, this constitutional republic whose founding charter states that we must respect the freedom of religion, that the government cannot establish a religion, and that everyone must have their right to exercise religion freely, I cannot co-sign using public services, using taxpayer-funded services to promote a specific religion within the classroom, which is what this mandate would be tantamount to doing. By the way, even as a Christian, I don't necessarily want my kids being taught by some random other Christian or random state-sponsored teacher about the Bible. What does a state-sponsored theology even look like? In China, there's a state-approved church that's allowed to teach certain things and not allowed to teach other things that the state disapproves of. Is that where we want to go as a country, to have state-sanctioned biblical teaching and non-state sanctioned biblical teaching? Do you want some random teacher to be giving your kid certain Christian theology that you may or may not agree with as a Christian? So it's not as simple as Bible good, put in school, let everyone learn it by mandate. I get it. I know the scriptures that say, blessed is the nation whose God is the Lord, and where the righteous rule, the people rejoice. But Jesus also said, my kingdom's not of this world. I'm reminded of when Jesus was telling the disciples of how he was going to have to suffer and be killed. And Peter stepped out and said, Lord, this will never happen to you. And Jesus said, get behind me, Satan. You are only thinking and seeing things from a human point of view. And when I hear this kind of sloganeering culture war Christianity, the Christ is King, the Christian nationalism, it's sort of taking up the torch on a human level and trying to fight this spiritual battle in politics. I'm also reminded of a short little story in John chapter 6 where a bunch of Jesus followers got really excited about everything that he was doing, and they decided he would make a great king. And it says they tried to make him king by force, but he withdrew to the mountain and went by himself. Jesus famously said, render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, and render unto God what is God's. And when I see Christians supporting the use of political power in order to advance Christianity within our culture, I think of the inversion of that. You are rendering unto God what is Caesar's. You're giving God your political activism as your worship, or I should say in place of your worship, and you're rendering unto Caesar what's God's. You're elevating the state to the level of the be-all, end-all, final authority of your life. Your faith is ultimately in the state. We have to win, or else all is lost. We have to win politically, or else the country is lost. I think of the early church and the early Christians. At first, they were a tiny group that was heavily persecuted by the authorities, by the emperors, by the Jews, and yet over time they began to win over the cultures in which they lived, and Christianity began to have the influence that it had locally and then grew into influencing the world. And how did that happen? It came through Christians living out a Christ-like example to the people around them. In those times, it was common for babies to be put out on the street to die of exposure because no one cared that they're made in the image of God. No one believed that. If it wasn't a male, if it had any kind of deformity or whatever, then it was just common practice to leave them out to die. And it was Christians who began adopting those children and saving them from death, saving them from a life of sex slavery. It was Christians who also began some of the earliest hospitals, educational institutions. So if you want to talk about the history of Christianity, let's talk about the history of Christianity, not in terms of mandating it in classrooms, but in terms of Christians in today's time living up to the example of our forebears by embodying Christ-likeness to our current culture and having that be the domain in which we fight, if we're calling it that, instead of trying to force Christianity, impose Christianity on our culture through legal means. If you want to get even more theological, we can go back to the beginning in the Garden of Eden when God put Adam and Eve in the garden and said you can eat from any tree that you want except this one. He gave them the free will to choose whether they would eat from that tree or not, because God doesn't want robots. He doesn't want people to obey him because they are forced to. And I think that principle holds true today when it comes to Christians and politics and the effort to use political power in order to coerce people to follow God, to have certain values or whatever that may be. That's not to say that we don't promote Christian values in our society, but we do that from the bottom up by having charity toward our neighbor, by loving on people, by going the extra mile, by demonstrating Christ-likeness to the world around us, by having radical love, radical generosity in our lives in the same way that Jesus embodied and commanded us to go and live and do likewise, do greater works than him. And just to underscore this point, I want to read a quote from the Roman Emperor Julian, who lived in the 4th century, who was witnessing the influence that Christians were having on Roman society through their charity, through their radical generosity, through living a Christ-like example among their peers. He said this: "For it is disgraceful that, when no Jew ever has to beg, and the impious Galileans support not only their own poor, but ours as well, all men see our people lack aid from us." This is a Roman emperor saying that we look bad as Romans because we're not caring for our own poor and the Christians are caring for the poor. If you want to shame the government, if you want to subvert society, then maybe just start living out the Christianity that we have instead of trying to impose laws that coerce your fellow citizens to obey a God and to learn about a Jesus that they don't see in you. So look, I'm going to end the rant or sermon, I guess, there. I didn't mean for this to be preachy, but I'm preaching to myself just as much as anybody else. But let me know what you guys thought. I imagine this is going to be a spicy one. It's going to be contentious among Christians and non-Christians alike. But I'd love to hear what y'all think about these mandates and whether or not they are a good thing. So thank y'all for watching. I'll see you next time.